Susan's in the house. Hello, Susan. Oh, hi, Susan.
Hi.
It is lovely to see you. Look at the glamour that you're adding to my screen. My goodness me. Are you well?
Yes, I am. I'm doing fine. Thank you. How is everybody?
Oh, better for seeing you. I'm so excited. We thought it might be just Leanne and I, but we've got a friend. We've got Susan. So I'm thrilled to see you, my darling. What drew you to this book, darling? What made you think this was a thing?
Well, I have been watching your vlogs for the past 2 weeks, and I'm so enchanted. You know, it's gotten me very, very excited. So I decided to just kind of study the broad online presence of Tara Brabazon, and came upon this reading. I came upon the writing group first.
Yes.
And I watched those because I'm writing. I'm doing a lot of writing these days. And then I came upon the reading group. And as I was reading about it, and I read the, introductory material from his book.
Yes.
It reminded me of my master's thesis.
Nice.
That I wrote 30 years ago.
Wow. That's not even possible, by the way. Looking at your fabulousness, that's not even possible. What was the master's thesis on, Susan?
The original title of it was The Managerial Sweatshop.
Ooh,
I couldn't get it. They did not allow, this was at Duke University. They did not allow that title because the sociologists and the cultural anthropologists, they loved the title. The economists hated it because, there's no such thing as a manager. Managers don't work in sweatshops, that sort of thing. So I had to change the title to something, mamby-pamby, like, the overwork of managers in the, information age or something like that. Yeah.
Well, I told you.
Yeah, I didn't get into politics, because I didn't know much about politics then, but it was basically around the same theme.
Oh, we have an expert with us today. I'm so excited. So I tell you what, Susan, it's going to be amazing to see the trajectory of theorizations of work and post-work since you did your master's thesis. So we are so lucky to have your expertise here. This is fantastic.
I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited I could explode. So, of course, Susan, you met the wonderful Leanne McRae, who's joined us in a very, very fashion-forward turquoise. Courageous colour, Leanne. Queen Maeve's in with a bit of shoulder pad work. Maeve.
No, it's just the puffy sleeves.
Oh, I love a bit of puffy sleeve work. And Shay's joined us as always from her FBI undisclosed location. So how are you going, Shay? It's been 3 months since I've seen you. Are you okay?
I'm good. Loving your recent podcast series. I'm getting so much out of it. Absolutely wonderful, exciting, and amazing.
Oh, you're very kind to me, but ironically, it is about capitalism. We are talking a lot about people suffering and the silence around that suffering. Yeah. And so, you know me, I always go, let's talk about money because people are suffering, right? So colleagues, will start. We've got the magical 6 with us, so I'm so excited. Colleagues, I will commence with an acknowledgement of country, acknowledging the traditional owners of all the lands on which we meet today, elders past, present and emerging, and any Indigenous colleagues with us today. And yes, I am thrilled. And can I say, Susan, you've seen the wonderful Megan Bayliss come in. She's joining us from Norfolk Island. So we are geographically blessed in our diversity today. And I will just acknowledge, as Megan's here, my friend who's joining us for End Times today. He's sort of our trope and our symbol. And the book is titled End Tile. See, you and I, we sort of match in our positivity and negativity. You see that, Maeve, you're a star. Oh, thank you, Jamie. So if anyone else has got an object they'd like to just sort of share for the image, now clearly is the time to do it. Leanne, don't, because God knows what's around you. But can I acknowledge this great book, End Times? Now, let's talk about this subtitle, Elite Counter Elites, which again, Susan's expertise we're going to use enormously in the next hour, and the path to political disintegration. So Peter Turchin wrote this book. It's just come out, like literally 6 weeks ago, 2023. And there's so many things we can talk about, colleagues. And, I'll sort of guide us through a journey, but we'll go in any direction you like. But I would like to start, and again, I've selected this book because I think it's important. Doesn't mean we agree with it. I think it's got a lot of errors and challenges and things to think about as well. But I wanted to start, I suppose, epistemologically and ontologically, if I can, because my first couple of degrees were in history when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And in that first year of that first lecture, I was taught that history is about continuity and change. Now, that was a long, long time ago, 1987, right? So Turchin is talking about integration and disintegration. And I wonder if that's just another version of change and continuity. He's deployed his complexity science and cliodynamics and so forth and patterns in history. Like this is sort of like history does science. This is very rigorous and very new. Colleagues, were you convinced by this, that we can understand history through integration and disintegration? Do you want to start there? I mean, Leanne, do you want to start us off? And then I'd love to go to Susan on theorization of integration and disintegration. Leanne, were you convinced by cliodynamics?
I'm still on the fence, I think. I think when I started reading it and I was annoyed from the, chapter 1 just annoyed me. But it kind of then got better as he started to be more nuanced and particular about the argument he was trying to make. Because I remain really ambivalent and really, irritated by this notion of prediction.
Yes.
And, and I think he does kind of moderate and mediate that, which is why I kind of came around a little bit, because he does kind of start to acknowledge the idea of complexity is not something that he puts aside, I think, yes, although it's not, nor is it fully integrated, I don't think, within the argument. So this idea of integration and disintegration, I mean, this is also a pattern. This is also, continuity and change, which is
the trope.
It's the same thing. It's just, I think what, understanding it, that the way in which things do change, I think, is where he's doing some interesting work. That he's looking at it from a different perspective, I think, to understand the nuances and the intersection between how things change, I think. And I think that's where some interesting kind of work is happening here. But yeah, I remain really ambivalent about prediction and,
yes.
the extent to which we can predict things. But, his argument is that there is a cycle here, and that there are particular trends that are common to each cycle. And I think there's merit to that. But I think, again, he's kind of warning to not oversimplify things and to not, kind of exist in tension with that, I think.
Yes. And I mean, history is art and science. It's both. But I suppose where I did get a little bit agitated was at the start. And I said to everyone, please hang on with the book, because I think the worst chapters are the first 2 chapters, unfortunately. But he's like, oh, no, if we make this a science, then it's predictive. Whereas history was always much more complicated than that, right? So I'll go to the legendary Susan. So what's your feeling about rendering history a pattern and empirical, nay empiricist, Susan?
Well, I studied history 30 years ago.
Yes.
And one of the first things they impressed on us was that history is not predictive. And at that time, I forget the exact name of the book, because it was 30 years ago. I think it came out in the 1980s. It was called Time on the Cross. And it was by these authors in the United States, which is where I am. It was about slavery. And one of the things they introduced to history at that time was this notion of using quantitative methods. And I think they called it cliometrics back then.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I mean, he's calling it something different, but they called it Cleometrics back then, and there was a big, big brouhaha about it. It divided the history faculties in half. Some were in favor of it, some were against it. But there is a danger, though. I still, even though 30 years later, I still see the danger in trying to predict something based on numbers and history. I mean, trying to predict the future
Exactly.
based on something that happened in the past. Because history, the reality is, the history is itself. I'm not saying that right. History is unique.
It is. It's
So
granular.
physics, chemistry, that sort of thing, you can predict, you can predict well enough with those sciences that you can go to the moon, you can send things to Mars, you can send, satellites and whatever. But with history, it doesn't work that way. It just,
Yes.
but still, even with that, I do appreciate what he has written.
Look, I agree, Susan, beautifully said. I mean, the nature of scientific methodology, the experimentation methodology, is it must be repeatable. You want data sets that are repeatable. Now, Susan, in this book, there's that pretty awkward moment where I felt my internal organs start to eat each other, where there was a reification of Lincoln and the slaves and Donald Trump, and you're just going, nah, mate. I'm feeling my internal organs move around a bit now in real time. So you can't reify. You can't render something teleological, and you can't reify. The specificity of Lincoln, I think, needs to be really respected and deeply understood.
Right. And also, now I admit I did not read the entire book, because I only found this group yesterday.
Oh, thank you. What a blessing.
But I understand him using American examples, political, and so on and so forth. I was thinking it might be helpful, possibly more helpful, to use examples from Europe following or during the beginning of the 20th century until the middle of the 20th century. Because there you had serious upheaval, World War before World War One, but then culminating in World War One, World War Two, and then the Cold War, and then the rebuilding of the whole country and the overthrow of all those kings and princes and whoever, which is not quite the same as what's happening in the United States. It's a different sort of thing. I mean, it's a different example.
And colonization was actioned differently. I think Susan's point's a great one. One can draw a golden thread through the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles, to the rise of Nazism in the Second World War. One can draw that, and that's interesting correlation. So I think Susan's analysis has helped us a lot there. And you'll notice there's a lot of subtlety, so much subtlety in Susan's work there about the difference between correlation and causality. And I really did not see that in this book. But look, let's get into, so we've done our sort of methodological thing. Leanne's gone, not convinced, girlfriend, not convinced. But from that discussion, let's drill into the arguments, because there's some interesting stuff there. And let's go to the key argument. And I really want to hear what colleagues want to say about this. There are 4 variables that Turchin watches through time: increasing gap between rich and poor, overproduction of young graduates in advanced degrees, my goodness me, declining public trust, and exploding public debt. And the argument is, when those 4 variables come together, something weird occurs. Now, Shay, what's your vibe on that? There's so much going on there, and it seems real because we're living it now. But is that a lens that's not generalizable either? Where are you on this, Shay?
First of all, I'd just like to say that I'm not a historian, so my apologies for any of my perspectives on that. And I also just wanted to make a comment about the complexity. You're absolutely right. my work is in complexity science, and the bottom line in complexity science is that it's not predictable and that it changes and there's chaos and there's multi-causality and non-linearity and also a range of things. And to the extent that even tomorrow's weather can't be predicted really accurately. So yes, all of that's true. And I also got the feeling that a lot of what was said in the book had been said before and was just being rearranged for current publication. But I thought the wealth pump, it was lovely to see that given a term, and the distance between the rich and the poor, because I've been saying that for years and years and years. All the money's being siphoned up. I use siphoned up as my terms. So that is obviously one. And I think that the promises of capitalism, where you get the radicalization of the educated who were promised a place at the table of the elites, and then they, all falls in, interest rates, can't get a house, COVID, no jobs. I don't think, look, I've just finished a PhD, so I don't think that getting higher degrees is the problem. I didn't like that one very much. That made me very uncomfortable. I think it's the idea of what it gets you. If people are doing it so that they can then be part of an extractive capitalist society, I think that's the problem. I think if higher degrees are placed in such a way as they're focused on the common good and what can actually be done for everybody, then, that argument just goes by the wayside.
Now,
so there are things I liked and things I didn't.
I'm going to push you, Shay. So therefore, the other subtle argument, of course, this was very confronting for me as the Dean of Graduate Studies who believes passionately in education and believes passionately in higher degrees and their quality. But Shay, have we promised social mobility? So is it the Fabian notion? So through education, have we promised social mobility that no longer exists? So we're lying to our PhD students, we're lying to our university students? I
don't know about we're lying. I think it's broader. I think it's a whole, there was a section in there about what happened during the late 70s and 80s when the middle class were moving on up and then the bottom fell out of it. It's bigger than just what's happening in universities. It's more, it's cultural. It's the Kardashian dream. I was just listening to your last podcast that if you do this, then you can be a megastar. Everybody can be a megastar. It's that sort of that being held up as more important than contribution and service to humanity. It's bigger. It's bigger than what universities are doing. They're just part of that, I think.
And Shay, that's extremely important to me. So you're arguing, and there wasn't a lot of attention to community and service and social justice in this book, which I was expecting, almost that the bowling alone, the Putnam argument, the loss of community, that's not there. But what we do have is this, and of course I've written a book called Trump Studies, for which I apologise, and there's some very strong, robust arguments there because it was written in real time. But there is a statement in this book that quotes, certainly there is little doubt that America is in crisis, though we fall out bitterly when it comes to the explanation, end of quote. So I think that's accurate. I think that's interesting. And then the movement through understanding race and racism, white supremacists, the Hillary Clinton deplorables, Antifa, deep state, libtards, I'll use these dreadful words. So what is going on there? We're dealing with polarized politics, certainly. We all know that. That's relatively self-evident. But is that based on a polarization of class and social opportunity? So in other words, is there a mapping of the political polarization over the economic and social polarization? Have you got a vibe on that, Maeve? Oh, sound, Angel.
Sorry, I made a little ha 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 because I was like deep into the question and I thought, oh, she's going to save me till last. So I was I wasn't switched off, but I was like deeply into that. So I got so far, I think, a lot more out of the book than I'm hearing. I mean, I did study some history, so I don't see myself as a proper historian, but I do see myself as a bit of a historian. So I thought there was a lot going on that was good. One of the things that I picked up I did read all of it, so I'm proud of that. Proud of my 12 hours and 5 minutes. So many things. So one thing that I just bring to this immediately, because I think it's fascinating, was that Turchin said that he thought that intellectual communities were stimulated by disagreement, and that disagreement was, hello everybody, that disagreement was like an essential part of academic growth. And
Yes.
I thought about that, and I think it has made me a sense that I might disagree more, where in the past I might have like agreed more because I think someone else has more caliber, for want of a better word, and I might go, oh, I'll just take the angle that I'm happy with, that I can agree about.
Yes.
So I'm feeling a bit bolder than normal, and and I think there was plenty to offer. Why I think he's so obsessed with the predictive aspect of it is that he's trying to put out what he thinks will happen in America in the next few years if alternative actions aren't taken. And I liked, for example, him talking about the 1930s and the making of an accord, and that the accord lasted so many years. And I think, like reflecting on Australia, I think there've been accords at times in Australia. But I also think that the notion of the wealth pump, I really like that. I hadn't, I did really like that, because I think that's exactly what we've just had under the Liberal government for 10 years, and it leaves social welfare in complete disarray, leaves education in disarray. It leaves everything that and I'm sort of identifying us, if you like, as an intellectual community with many people who maybe aren't here today. And I'm just thinking, as an intellectual community, we have strong values, and my values were not met by 10 years of Liberal government. They're not met by capitalism, for a start. But I just think there's plenty to offer in that book that I did find interesting. I sort of zoned out on, a huge chunk on Ukraine and Belarus, and, and there was quite a lot about Europe in there, worth a thought. But I'm just throwing it out that I thought there was more. I thought there was good things to offer in the book.
And I think you've captured there that there is a disconnection between, in the old days, Marxist theory, one's class would determine one's consciousness. And so this book captures there is now a disconnection between social, economic reality, one's identity and one's consciousness, that's now in disarray. And yeah. I think you've handled that very well, Maeve. I think that's true. And so the notion of the elite and the counter elite and so forth is part of that challenge. But I wonder, let's get into the really tough conversation, noting that dissonance and disconnection around identity and any sort of base superstructure conversation. And do you want to talk about unpartnered white men? Because obviously this is the incel challenge. This is, we're going to go there. This is the, the Donald Trump grouping, the undereducated, unpartnered men, the main audience for Jordan Peterson, as we all know. And it's a group that is a very, very sad, very tragic group. Case and Deaton have called the deaths of despair of unpartnered men who are committing suicide, opiate usage and alcohol, and white undereducated people who have not done 4 years at university. That is the group that now are confronting a decline in living length and deaths of despair.
Yes.
Now, Megan, this is a tough conversation, isn't it? Because, there are so many injustices, multiphasic identity injustices. And yet we've got this quite complicated group of white men, often unpartnered white men, that are causing a fair amount of trouble through our cultures. Have you got a view on this? I know these are difficult conversations, but by not having these difficult conversations, I think we end up with Donald Trump.
Okay, I'm probably the wrong person to ask this question of, because I'm quite a staunch feminist.
That's good.
The reason I am a feminist is because of those uneducated white men with opinions that are designed to polarize. Like they're happy to polarize rather than being happy with disagreement, as Maeve was suggesting, and learning from each other in that disagreement. So as for the suicide, I think that it's possibly more obvious that the poorer men are suiciding, whereas when people from different classes suicide, we have different names for it as well, which is really interesting. Like nobody yet has come out and said the reason for the recent, oh gosh, her name has just left me now. Oh, what's her name?
Who?
The recent singer.
Sinead O'Connor.
Sinead.
Thank you, Sinead. Yeah, Sinead. Yeah. Nobody has come out to my knowledge to say that she suicided. You know, we call it different things. So I find that all very interesting as well. Now, I only got through to the first 4 chapters of the book, and I really resonated and identified with Jane as the precariat. I really identified with her in her role as a structural functionalist, wanting to change from the inside out, which is what I did for years and years and years. But also in my very early years, I was the person with the placards. I was the screamer. And my father was a high-ranking army officer and did 3 tours of Vietnam. And I'm born and grew up in an overseas country, and we ate politics for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I have some understanding of the class wars that go with that as well. But I soon realized that the placard hell-raising woman never served me, and it didn't create any social change. So I had to change the way that I did things as well, which went into structural functionalism, just as Jane changed the way she was doing things. So I found that all incredibly fascinating, but also their discussion on, I think they called it the American Creed.
Yes. And
just thinking through songs of, and I'm going to say the Vietnam War because that's the era that I know the best. So a lot of the folk music and the words of the songs that came through that also really displayed what was happening in America, the people who believed in war, those who didn't believe in war, the classes. But also something that really stood out for me in the first 4 chapters was popular maxims. I hear said all the time in current life that the best predictor of future is the past, whereas part of my business model is that history tells us who we are, but it does not define who we're going to be. That is up to all of us. And I was beginning to love conversations that I could see the threads rising for the social interventionalism and the development of social capital, and really caring about what we do for other people and how we do it for other people, and making sure that everybody is okay.
Yeah, I mean, Megan, that's deeply meaningful for me. And I wonder if we failed to do that. So my argument perhaps, and obviously I'll use the expertise of this great group of people, Leanne and Susan, I can see are waiting to have a go here, but by configuring a group of people as deplorables, and can I say I had enormous respect for Hillary Clinton, I still do, but by configuring a group like that, that particular group is removed from consensus building discussions. So in the war of position, to summon some Gramsci, that group are out in the corridor or out in the car park. And when groups disconnect in that way, we now have the disintermediated, deterritorialized online environment that allows very, very small groups to find each other and behave very, very badly. And we've seen the consequences of that. Once we start to let that community conversation go, then some bad things happen. Claudia, have you got any vibe on this, Queen Claudia, about trying to build a community and build a connection between people rather than sort of going, look, those people, we won't talk with them, you know, they're Trump voters, we won't engage with them. Have you got a feeling on that, Claudia?
Hi everyone. Hi, it's Claudia here. from Hong Kong. Sorry, I'm just catching up, so I might not be quite getting your question, but hi, I'm showing my presence.
Oh,
Right, so I'm catching up. Yeah, so you're asking whether I'm feeling like people are we have the force of getting people together as communities instead of people are departing from one another.
yes.
In general, I think yes. I'm not sure this is the right example that I quote. Like now, we are gathered together to talk about important topics, and yeah, and also social media. That I actually have been watching your teaching. So you talk about social media, how we can make good use of it. Academics and maybe in other areas. So I think technology does pull people together.
Beautifully said, Claudia. And I wonder, though, we've got that wonderful community building initiative, which we've got here today. I wonder if it also is exclusionary, though, as well. So Reddits and subreddits, all sorts of fun and games happen through Reddits, etc. And groups that are so violent and disconnected and brutalizing towards others gain courage and gain consciousness and gain friends in their disrespect and brutalizing of others. Does that worry you at all? I mean, we call it the trolls and so forth, but I wonder if that brutalizing builds through digitization.
I think so. Just quote a very local example, like in Hong Kong, the politics recently. So yeah, so it does. Technology does put people together, but also polarize people. So it's the political views in Hong Kong, and how the local people and maybe the mainlanders who are here are talking about one another through social media. Yes.
Yeah, so we want it to build community and connection, but so often dissolves. Beautifully said, Claudia. And of course, we'll go to the light of our lives, Queen Jane. Queen Jane, you well, thanks for that face, Jane. You look so comfortable. I want to be you. What a lounge suite. But can I say, Jane, the work you do is all about building relationships and creating new models of women in leadership, for which we are incredibly proud of you, Jane. But I wonder, and I'm being provocative because this does concern me, that when women come together and focus on building affirmative models for women, multiple races, religions, backgrounds, ages, and we are building a strong community of women, including non-binary identifying colleagues, trans colleagues, we're moving forward. Now, I wonder what happens to the men that are not in that conversation. And Jane, what do we as feminists say, whatever your particular stripe, what do we do about that? So should feminism be gaining and engaging with men's studies and masculinity studies, or do we make a decision to just sort of let those unpartnered men stay in the car park or on a subreddit and forget about them?
Thank you, Tara. Hello, everyone. I think, again, it comes back to the language. We don't have the word feminist in Vietnam because we are, like the saying say, wife is first, God second. So we have everything. Why do we need any women movement or anything? But actually, that's just the wording. That's just to say that we have to do everything. So the same thing with men. You see that with the writing club, you have men in there because you are acting like a real leader, Tara, like water. Why? Humble. You are the sea, and all the stream and river will come to you. That's the important things. It's not like the leader, you're on top that no one can reach you, but you're humble like the water. You are at the lowest. And people feel comfortable to come to see you.
Oh, you're wonderful saying that, Jane. I don't think I'm that human, but I'm very grateful for your kind words. But I wonder, and we do have a great diversity of human beings, men, non-binary identifying colleagues that are part of our story. But what is significant, for example, talking about the overproduction of elites, is from 2017, women-dominated doctoral programs in the United States, and the rest of the nations have followed that example. So more women are in PhD programs than men. And so we've got generations of women that will be more qualified than their partners, unless, of course, we're dealing with wonderful lesbian partnerships, and then that's a whole other fantastic combination. But I wonder about this. I mean, Leanne, you see what I'm concerned about. you know, I don't want to blame feminists for creating the incel, right? I don't want to blame feminism for creating these gentlemen, these men that are fractured from a consensus civilized identity society. But something is going wrong, Leanne, and it's killing people. Have you got a view on this?
Oh, I have so many views.
Yeah.
And I guess I kind of want to backtrack a little bit, and because Maeve was talking about the nature of disagreement,
Wow.
the idea of disagreement and having the courage to disagree. And I kind of want to present an intervention a little bit, or an interruption, I guess. And that is, I think we have plenty of disagreement. I think there's, plenty of disagreement. I think Maeve's point about the courage to sit within disagreement is really important, and particularly for women who are trained to be nice and agreeable at all times. And that moment that we become disagreeable is the moment we become the shrew, the problematic woman.
Right.
So I think that's really, really important. But I think also we need to think about the nature and the type of disagreements that we're having, and the moment at which we mobilize disagreement, activate disagreement, operationalize it in a particular way. And this is something that I've been reading Thomas Raymond's new book on social harm, and he actually talks about this as there, and I think where this argument resonates for me within Raymond's work a little bit more than this book that we're discussing, because he discusses this notion of we don't have a language to find a common ground.
Yes.
And then he situates this as the scaffold for harm is that you're either, you're over here, you're over, this is your position and that this is the other position, and we don't have a way to actually talk to each other through the disagreement. Yeah. And I think that's really resonant for me in particular, because I think what is happening here is and this is part of what you're talking about, the uncomfortable rise of this kind of white masculinity, toxic. I don't like using the word toxicity. I think that's really
brutalizing violence.
Yeah. Yes. And I think what's happening here is this. That's become it's become a language to reinforce a particular type of reinforce a masculinity that is I don't like also crisis. It's not necessarily a crisis, but it's a destabilization, I guess. And the language in which we have to talk about that destabilization is located within feminism, and that is fundamentally abhorrent and as it potentially should be, maybe, to the men who are trying to navigate these kinds of ways of thinking. Yes. And I think this is about the fragility. This is a human condition. It's not just about men and women. It's about the fragility of our ego. And I think the ultra realists try to manage it. I don't know if they do it successfully. They deploy Lacan to think through the fragility and how that fragility manifests, because manifests in anger and brutality and violence, and this is not just a brutality to other people. This is a brutality to the men themselves.
That's correct.
This is a shortchanging of the masculinity within themselves.
Yes.
And and there's a focus on where the blame for that lies, rather than actually understanding and navigating the ways in which masculinity as an identity, as a consciousness, as performance, as a role, as a part of society, how that actually exists, and how we actually engage with men, and how men engage with the world, and how men engage with work and engage with all of these things. And
when work has never been more unstable. So
yes.
Particular renderings of masculinity have required particular renderings of work to loan consciousness and identity and stature to masculinity, right? So, and of course, a vagina does not a feminist make. And as you and I have argued for nearly 25 years now, Leanne, feminism really shouldn't be providing all the answers to men and masculinity. And that's why we believe so strongly in men's studies, masculinity studies, that, you know, women should not be solving men's problems. That's sort of, you know, women are not men's social worker. You know, we are not here to solve problems. Feminism is not here to solve problems. And men working with other men to sort through consciousness matters, alternative ways of configuring masculinity. That sort of was the project for the last 25 years. But sadly, it's ended up with this disconnection from consensus, so that we're not having these complicated, delicate discussions about what's happening to men and masculinity in a post-work environment, and we're ending up with Donald Trump. So
yeah, and I think also, I think there's something about that actually being in that process, that actual process that you've described there as being somehow feminine in its nature. Yeah. This idea of actually critically unpacking, this idea of you know, connecting back to this idea of being in this level of consciousness, this level of reflexivity is a bit soft. It's a bit feminine. It's feminine to be in touch, to actually try and work through that. And so what we get in response is a hard no. We get a hard reinforcement of a very retroactive form of masculinity.
And isn't that so ironic, Leanne? Because of course it was Marx and Engels who said life determines consciousness, consciousness does not determine life, right? So actually it's going back to 1848 and a couple of blokes, one who had a really good beard.
Yeah,
so
need a good beard.
Bit of strong beard work there. So of course, let's go straight to Susan. Now, Susan, what's your, because obviously you are living this reality. I only occasionally visit. What's your rendering of fear, of the fear of this group that is wandering about and every now and again occupies the White House, this counter elite configuration?
They are wandering around with guns now.
Wandering around with guns.
Each other and killing others. And it's very here it's very strange because we Americans, we have the power to kind of slow it down by dealing with guns the same way that Australia did, the same way New Zealand did, the same way Canada, you know, other places have done, and it seems very simple to do. And it's the same, and many of them are the same incel people that we're talking about. But we don't do it. No. We don't do it. It's as if we can't do it. And the question becomes, why can't we do it? And I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that yet. But one thing I you know, this discussion has reminded me of, that I talk with my friends in academia about, had to do with the 9/11 attacks here in the United States.
Yes.
Right before 9/11, when we had George Bush, he was president then. Donald Trump was really awful.
Yes.
Bush was awful too.
Yes.
And he was awful before 9/11.
Yes, that's correct.
And the fracturing and all the breaking up and, you know, whatever, all of that was happening in the months and years and months, especially before 9/11. 9/11 came when there was this big hunk of violence. I live in New York City area, by the way. There was this big chunk of violence. All of a sudden, people came together. It was very strange. The same people who were yelling at each other and who were attacking each other and, you know, all of this, all of a sudden we're hugging and comforting each other. And so it is possible. Yes. The problem is, it seems to, and this is one of the issues with the book, The End Time. One of the things that I think about when I saw this book is, does it take that level of violence in order to come together, in order to make a decision?
And Susan, what a powerful statement that is. I think you're probably right. My rendering of it probably would have been distinct following on from Benedict Anderson's imagined communities. So when so many variables, particularly with regard to race and religion, are actioned, nationalism becomes, and I'll use the word band-aid, although I need a stronger metaphor than that. It's the bandage that sort of holds together a broken, body corpus, if you will. And so that's why nationalism operates so effectively at times of war. September 11 is a great example. If we think about Donald Trump, make America great again. So when variables of race and religion and ethnicity and language, and we can just keep going on and on and on through that list, nationalism, maybe it lies to us, Susan, I don't know, because it tries to pretend that we as human beings share less than we do. And
the thing about it is, even though we came together in many ways in the United States, we turned that power around and attacked Afghanistan and killed people in Afghanistan for 20, what was it, 20 years?
yes.
It's crazy. And then, well, there are other things, but, don't get me started on all of that.
Indeed,
but the same energy that we could have used to rebuild, to connect each other here in the United States, because, there is a big still, we use that same energy to practically destroy Afghanistan.
Yes, and so nationalism once more through violence confirms same other and empowers the same. And I mean, Susan's led us to this crucial bit of this book, which I think is accurate, is correct, looking at the two variables, which is elite overproduction, but popular immiseration. And I think it was lovely Claudia who said the Barbie movie. I mean, there's who knew we'd be going there? Of course, Oppenheimer and Barbie as well, astounding. But the popular immiseration, so that the bulk of the population just, can't organise housing at all, food insecurity, energy insecurity. Just Susan, to give you an example, in Australia, I'm sure there's other variables in the States as well, but in a city we have called Brisbane, the largest group of homeless people and the largest growth in homeless people are women over the age of 55. So the popular immiseration, the feminisation of poverty, and yet we've got Case and Deaton. So good morning, Sarah, or good afternoon, Sarah. Are you well?
My mum's one of those statistics. She's 85. There's not very much. She worked right up until a year before last, so 83, as a full-time nurse, worked to rent. And now she's couch surfing between my brother and I. So she's 85 and she could no longer rent. So she stays with us for some of the time and then travels down to Western Australia to my brother. So she's one of those statistics, and it really rings home because, those housing statistics haven't gone down.
No.
And they have been creeping forever. And it's now we're here today is in Australia today, they've decided that there's mortgage stress and the housing mortgage between 1 and 3 years is everyone's who bought 3 years ago have just sold because they can't afford the price. And I just see that in terms of these confounding concepts that are happening here in Australia, not just what Teppa was saying in America.
Yes.
You can see it in Australia right now.
And the horror of, and again, this is present in this book, human beings working their guts out, in full-time work, 2 and 3 jobs, and working to 83. And
83.
And still
nursing
to secure, and of course, and all of that is about nursing, midwives, teachers, particular occupations not being paid properly for decades. But Sarah, let's follow this story through. So this is happening to your mother, to multiple mothers, people falling through the cracks. And these aren't a few people. This is now a sizable chunk of populations around the world. So let's move that forward. What happens through the popular immiseration? One rendering in the 19th century was revolution happens. So it just gets to the point where a few elite people are running things and so many people are suffering that a revolution occurs. What's your rendering of that, my queen?
Well, I'm only halfway through, but when I read about when I was reading about the different kinds of revolutions that were sparked by that popular immiseration and the fact that there was cycles of it and they could be identified in data, I found that fascinating. And then I just thought about Russell Brand, the British comedian who wrote a book about revolution, and he wasn't wrong. He was suggesting that we completely dismantle the hierarchy and replace it with something much more lovey-dovey, warm and fuzzy. But that's only one way of doing a revolution. And in fact, I think my understanding of the French Revolution was the same idea. Dismantling the system and putting in place something a little bit more common good, but it didn't work because at the heart of it, I imagine, I'm not up to the bit, which explains why revolutions don't work, but they are skewed in terms of creating more hierarchies.
And Sarah, of course, the challenge of the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution is we use the word in the singular, revolution, where, of course, the French revolutions were multiple revolutions. And, of course, there were conservatively two communist revolutions in Russia. The first one was very much the middle class trying to just correct.
Which was it?
To say, let's correct this. And, of course, that didn't go far enough. And on went the next revolution. So the question is, Sarah, and this links in, maybe it's just after where you are in your book. I'm trying to work out where you are in your reading. But the diminished economic conditions are resulting in decline, increasing in death rates and, people just suffering with regard to health. On we go. So where does that end, Sarah? Do we just start to then have, and I'll use the Marxian language, an underclass? And I'm sort of very provoked by this because obviously I've lived around the world, including the middle of Manchester, and in Darwin, Australia, 3 times in the last fortnight when I've gone out to go to the gym at 4 a.m. in the morning, I've had a homeless person sleeping in the front of my car. So, and what a tragedy that is. What an absolute, so there's the garage, there's the car, what a tragedy. So Sarah, at what point does this economic structure become untenable and it snaps or breaks?
Well, it's got to be soon. But Susan said that she was quoting 9/11 and saying that, the nationalism was sparked because of the tragedy of 9/11. And we do have crises that bring people together. The shooting in New Zealand, when that brought people together. People inherently are happy to be part of the common good, but I'm still waiting to read the part in the book, in the End of Times book, about the fracturing of society at the moment because we're all living in silos.
Powerfully said, and what a powerful use of the word silo. Can I say that is my concern, Sarah? As always, you and I are linked. You went straight there. Queen Maeve in.
Thank you. I think we have to talk about climate change. We can't be having that. I hear you, Sarah. I'm really grateful for your contribution there. We had the floods down here. Brisbane had the floods. All of these places have a even further extenuation, if you like, because the trends that are happening nationally, if you bring serious climate change into it, it exacerbates it. And where we maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we all knew where climate, plenty of people knew where climate change was going to take us. It's just that we're there. And, we're not half there, we're there. If you look at Greece, Italy, you know, one of the things that has stayed in my brain, when they had heat waves in France, the poorest people in France are older women. They lived in the attics all over the cities, and it doesn't go well with heat waves, and they died.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So climate and climate change manifests and actions differently via social economic structures. And of course, Shay, that leads us to, I did want to touch base here because I did love this. I'm at page 126 of this book, where we talk about the difference between conspiracy theories and scientific theories. I mean, welcome to COVID, colleagues, right? So conspiratorial theory is often vague about the motives of behind the scene leaders, or assigns them implausible motivations. Now, Shay, how many people died because they decided that the CIA or the FBI invented COVID?
Yes, it's a fascinating thing, and I think I very much agree with you, Maeve, that that was one of the things that I picked up through the book. Climate change is not mentioned here. Climate change is not mentioned here. That is very different now than has ever been in history before. And one of the things that's occurred to me in listening to everybody is, and I don't know how this fits with everyone who are historians, but the concept of identity and what it means to be human is not the same now as it's been throughout history. And it's one of my pet topics. And I think that one of the things that human beings have been fed or have evolved into is this idea that we are indeed as individuals in our little silos. And when the actual fact, identity and who we are as beings is multidimensional, and we are generated and co-generated by all of the relationships that we have, be that with family and culture and more than human nature around us, all of the bacteria. There's more bacterial cells in our bodies than there are human cells, all of the things that we live in deep relationship with. And I think I see some of the psychological despair that leads to deaths of despair as well. A contributing factor is this idea that you're an absolute individual and you have to make it on your own, that your manhood is something that you can self-generate, when it's actually culturally generated. Manhood in particular, if you read anything of Indigenous knowledge and anthropology, manhood is something that needs to be generated and regenerated and regenerated and relationally regenerated to hold any coherence. But if you're left to your own devices, and I'm, you know, separating the genders a little bit here, the sexes, whereas the female body with you know, monthly flows and our connection to the moon and various things, there's an inherent earthness of femaleness. And I live quite a non-binary life, so I've kind of messed with both expressions of gender and see how masculinity is very constructed. And yet when you remove the capacity for that construction and leave men on their own and say, well, you didn't get there, you're an absolute failure, so damaging. And yet this book even treats identity and human beings as if they've been the same throughout history.
Boom. There it is, Shay. You're just legendary. So the very nature of what is human is an historical entity. It's not cyclical. It's not predictable. It is volatile and dynamic.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's going to relate very, very closely to what's happening with the climate, because we are all co-generated by the environment and the earth that we live within. And as that shifts and moves around us, it's going to be, wow, I don't really know. I don't know.
Didn't we learn a lesson through COVID that that science has been marginalized?
Yeah.
And so what have we got for, hopefully we got for climate change? I know that's a bit off topic.
No, but see, it's actually on topic, because then we've got the overproduction of elites. So we've got people that are overproduced. So we now have a large number of people with PhDs in an array of sciences. So what happens? Well, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, now it's very difficult to find a program to be able to do a physics degree or a chemistry degree. So do we want to live in a world where we no longer educate physicists, that physicists don't exist, or we train pharmacists, but they haven't got any chemistry, right? So this is the challenge of the post expertise going, we've got too many PhD students. Let's stop that. Let's retract our universities and educate fewer people with fewer degrees. That's the great challenge of that. But then let's follow Shay on for our final hurrah of our gig today. Now, I've spent a lot of my life, and of course I've dragged Paul Leanne McRae through this as well, but focusing on the changing nature of work. Stan the Man Arnowitz, a wonderful, wonderful US scholar who changed my life, incredible man, good friend of Henry Giroux, who also has done a lot of work on the nature of work. In this book, there's a discussion of, quote, an oversupply of workers, depressed wages. So I wanted to finish off with what is going to happen to work. Right, we've got the climate variable that we've talked about. So a whole series of occupations are going to be cut away. Geographies are going to be cut away. I'm at the top end of the Northern Territory at the moment. There are certain activities that are just not going to be possible to do here any longer. So we've then got the climate variable. But Jane, what's going to happen to work? We need fewer workers, or do we?
No, I don't think that we have the right kind of workers, because like I'm a Vietnamese person doing my study in an Australian country, and I by myself have to learn what work for my country in my way, because Australian expert don't have that expertise. They couldn't find a river, you see. So I think it's not, we are not having over production of PhD, but we have under production of PhD who know what's going on in their local culture. And only by doing that, we can save the nature. We are part of the nature. We are the river lying down. So each river is very different depending on where you are. So now we supposed to have only one Western river. So it's not working.
And of course, it never will work. That's exactly right. So the very foundational definition of work, we've got the definition wrong. So therefore, and that wrongness of that definition, that Fordist, masculinist 19th century, I'll use the word Western, although I never use it, but that particular British Industrial Revolution rendering of work still survives with us, even though it died 200 years ago. But I mean, Megan, you work very strongly with people thinking through different ways of living their lives. Have you got a view on the future of work?
I think it's interesting how COVID changed the way we conceptualize work, and how quickly we adapted legislatively and policy-wise to allowing people to work from home. So I think that this might be the beginning of seeing some major change. I absolutely love what Jane says about rivers and the conceptualization of a river. Jane, I'm a bit in love with you, so you just keep talking your stuff, all right? But yes, I think things are going to change. I have no idea how they're going to change. That is not my area of expertise, but I do believe that everybody has their own expertise, and that intrinsically we all have an idea of what we want, but we've become enculturated into what somebody else wants. And it really is time to reconnect with ourselves, work out what our value systems are, and start working towards those value systems, and not hurting other people in the process. We are all people. It doesn't matter that there are such great differences, but we are people, and we have to respect that.
And also working, my obsession at the moment is working to listen to and build the connections with people that we disagree with. I think too often, I think the nature of the online environment is that echo chamber. We engage with people who agree with us all the time, and we start to get a bit brittle and don't value the expertise of others. So from my perspective, Megan, you know, I want to try and every day work harder to build that consensus up. I don't want to lose white working class men. I don't want them on subreddit getting some guns and having a time. I want to listen to them without judgment, and then try and figure out how we can configure an environment, a planet, a workplace, a family structure with relationships.
Look, diamonds are made of so many facets, and each facet has a different light. And if you're looking through that facet, you see something differently. And for years, I've begged people to try and help me understand the whole Trump movements. You know, those white men that just absolutely love Trump and everything that he represents. I don't understand it. Am I missing something? Educate me, help me understand what the hell is going on here. I might never vote for him, but help me understand.
And so that's why I wrote the book Trump Studies, because it is understandable, Megan, because there was a group that had not completed 4-year university degrees, were in regional and rural areas, evangelical Christians frequently. And so therefore, and I'll use the language that was used in the surveys, they no longer recognize their America.
Yeah, okay.
So they saw a businessman, an outsider, a counter elite who spoke a different language. It still wasn't their language, but it was different from the deplorables, the woman over there. Now, the thing is, he, of course, came into office and can't govern because he got no understanding of administration, leadership, economics. And so, you know, basically it was 4 chaotic years that sort of felt like we were in sort of Yoko Ono's 1968 studio. Really, every day it felt like that. It wasn't governed. It wasn't a government. It was a performance art experiment, and it failed. But again, because we haven't addressed those issues with those groups, we're back here again.
And I think we're seeing this again quite staunchly, because I think Megan's raised something really important about the shift from, you know, the work from home thing. But I also kind of slightly disagree, because I don't think it was that seamless, and I don't think it was that welcomed by those on the other end of it. I think it was done kicking and screaming. I think it was an imperative of capitalism that it happened, and people didn't necessarily shift to a work from home model. They just lost their jobs. And I think we have lost sight of that in the middle of COVID, that there are actually a whole bunch of people who just lost their jobs. They didn't have the luxury of switching to a work from home model. And now we're seeing it, you know, there's a lot on the other side that are trying to drag people back into the office. They are absolutely insistent and only begrudgingly give up work from home time, and only when it becomes an imperative of capitalism.
So are we now tolerating, therefore, Leanne, a certain level of unemployment and underemployment now? That
Absolutely.
We have simply forgotten about these groups that are now not affording their electricity, particularly in areas of Europe during winter. So energy poverty, not managing with food banks. And we've just there again, the new group that are just in the car park, and we are not seeing them and not building those relationships. So it's been forgotten.
Yeah, it's special liberty. It's the cost of doing business. It's just the way it is. It's how capitalism works, and it is the market that is determining this. And so we have no agency to actually intervene in that because it's the market. And
so Leanne, are we going to put up with that? So let's, as we reach the conclusion, I want to be Susan, by the way. Obviously, you know, we all want to be Jane, clearly, but I want to be Susan as well. But so therefore, let's get hard on this, Leanne. Let's finish off. Are we just going to keep suffering in? And you know, I'm really dealing with despair at the moment. Despair, right? Now, are we all just going to stay there, are we? And every now and again, someone, as Susan said, someone will get a gun and go into a church and shoot people, and we go, oh, that's terrible, isn't it? And then it does a couple of news cycles and we move on to the next one. How much despair can we tolerate?
I think we can tolerate a fair bit of despair, because change is really painful. We like to see change as an eruption. That's why we are so in love with revolution, when maybe the change is not actually about the revolution, because actually maybe the revolution is just about the blood. Maybe the revolution is just about revenge, and it's a moment in time where we erupt and take that revenge. And maybe the actual work of change happens outside of that.
And it's more courageous to sit in the despair, but make a different decision.
Yes.
Colleagues, I thank you for this last hour more than I can express in words. I always say I feel sort of changed after these reading groups, but I really do today. You know, we've met the wonderful Susan. I think Susan's changed my life pretty well permanently. I thank you for your expertise. I feel so privileged to have met you today, Susan. Thank you.
Glad to have met all of you.
And look, let's keep these conversations going, because I think what we've learned here is, as Leanne said, a revolution in many ways lets us off the hook. Right? We go, when the revolution comes. Well, maybe it's not about revolution. Maybe it is, to quote the Pet Shop Boys, about revelation. And every day we wake up, we have a moment of revelation, and we put our hands out to meet and join with other humans who are different from us, but we can still care and show compassion. Colleagues, thank you so much for your hour. It's been an hour of power. And I wish you well. Oh, Susan, please, darling, talk to us.
Does this group meet every week?
I would love it to, but Susan, what we normally do is, when we find a quirky, weird book, we sort of go, let's do that. So it is a bit of a 60s happening, but we may be dealing with, as Leanne said, I've been looking at a recent book on harm. Maeve, do you want to hold that up again?
I do.
And so that is a wonderful book from the legendary Thomas. So I'm thinking we'll give everybody enough time, because I'm aware I read quite quickly, so I don't want to put pressure on people. But we really do. My intention, Susan, is basically about once a month, if we find something fabulous, that we'll come together as a family and read it. Would you be up for that, Susan? Because I'd love to work with you again.
Absolutely.
Oh, I feel changed. Colleagues, thank you. Have a lovely afternoon, a lovely evening, wherever you are on planet Earth, from Hong Kong to New York to Norfolk Island to Perth, Western Australia. And yes, a big shout out from Darwin, Northern Territory. Love you all. International education rocks. See you on the other side.
Thank you all so much.
Bless you.
Bye.
Wow. What a gift.